Chapter 4 tests over federalism. Okay, I've got 10 matching questions. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fill in the blanks. 7 true and false. And 4 short answers. 2 worth 2, 2 worth 3. Good? All right. The vocab that you guys did, that some of you did, will come in handy, so I would look over that as well. But we'll go over this review sheet and start with interstate compacts. Interstate compacts. Which would be an agreement among, what do you think? Interstate compacts would be an agreement between, between states. Try not to miss that on the test. Okay. Revenue sharing. How did Mr. Ebright describe revenue sharing? I used an analogy. Correct. Okay. So, no, I'm not putting it on the test. But it is distribution of federal tax dollars among local and state governments. Now, while we're talking about this, there are other, after a while they did revenue sharing, distribution of federal tax dollars among local and state governments. They changed the name from revenue sharing to what? Today we call these what? Grants, okay? But then there's 2 types of grants. So let's jump down to block grants, which is down in the middle. You see it? I see block grants. All right, let's give you a definition of that. Federal funds that can be used by a state government, federal funds that can be used by a state government in a broadly defined area. Key word being broadly defined area. Because we're talking about block grants, yes? So when you think of block, think broad, yes? You'll get that right on the test. And then let's jump down like 2 more spots and see categorical grants. See that? Grants that provide federal aid for specific purposes, for very specific. Example of this would be natural disasters. Okay, so it's got a category. It's very specific. That makes sense? Okay. Extradition. Is the process of sending criminals back to a state from which they fled. The process of sending criminals back to the state from which they fled. extradition. We talk about that in here? Okay, if you're running from the police and you flee the state of Wichita, can the Kansas State Trooper follow you into Oklahoma? Well, yeah, they have a driver's license just like you do. They can drive in Oklahoma. Can they arrest you in Oklahoma? No, they don't have jurisdiction there. So they can call ahead to Oklahoma and say, hey, got this guy, he's running from us. Will you stop him and detain him? Now, they can't, the Oklahoma State Trooper can't turn that person over to the Kansas State Trooper. There's a process, okay? And that process falls in that area we talked about, privileges and immunities, okay? The governor of Kansas has to call the governor of Oklahoma, say, hey, you guys have this person that's wanted for a crime in Kansas. We would like to extradite them back to Kansas to face trial. Okay, that's the process. Okay. You can't just have the cops, chasing people in other jurisdictions and doing whatever they want. Okay. Concurrent powers. Current powers. Trying to get you the right definition here. Okay, concurrent powers are powers that are shared by both national and state governments. Examples. What the state of Kansas do, the federal government also does. Taxes, courts, building roads, concurrent. Okay. Enabling Act. Okay, I don't think I talked about this, but it might have been on your homework. Okay, before Kansas was a state, it was a what? It was a territory. So the process of a state becoming, a territory becoming a state has two steps, okay? Now, first, you got how many people have to live in the territory for it to become a state? Any idea? We learned this last year in history. You got to have 60,000 people. Okay? Now, the only real requirement that your territory has to have is called the Enabling Act. Okay? To write a constitution with a representative government. Okay? The Enabling Act directs a state to write a constitution with a representative government. So if you're going to become a state, people in your state are going to be able to elect the state government. Just like we do, we get to elect our state legislatures that go to Topeka. Okay? So that's the Enabling Act. Now, if you look at, you guys know we have 4 American territories outside of the contiguous United States? Yes. What are they? Oh, whoa. Cuba? No. They're an independent nation. Philippines used to be a territory. We gave it back in 1946, July 4th. Puerto Rico, so we got Guam, Puerto Rico, American Virgin Islands, one more. This is the land of giants. Like giant people. Like their race is large. where the rock is from. American Samoa. Okay. You guys know any Samoans? Okay.
Any in Kansas?
You know, I don't know if I have. Now I went to high school with a Samoan family, and they had like 4 or 5 kids, girls and boys, and they were all huge. Okay. Yeah. So now, if does Samoa have 60,000 people? Yes. Does Puerto Rico? Yes. Does Guam? Yes. Does the American Virgin Islands? Yes. So any of those 4 could petition to become a state. Okay. Now, all of those territories do have representative governments right now. Okay. So basically, they would have to vote, and Puerto Rico has held votes on this, whether to become a state or not. It's never passed, but it's been close. So once the state requests, they write a constitution, then we have what's called an act of admission. Okay, which is on your review sheet, down under block grants. Okay, so enabling act directs the territory to write a constitution. The act of admission brings it into the union. Brings a territory, makes it a state, brings it into the union. Now, if any of these 4 chose to become a state, obviously we'd have to change the flag, which could get complicated. Not sure what we do. I might be able to fit one like right in the middle there. If 2 of them did it, do it a little bit differently. Yeah. Okay. So we got enabling act. Let's go to criminal law. Okay. Criminal law. I think this was on your homework. Okay. Laws that forbid certain actions. Criminal laws. Laws that prevent certain actions. And provide punishments for violations. Provide punishments for violations. Inherent powers. Powers that naturally belong to any sovereign government. Powers that naturally belong to any sovereign government are inherent. I mentioned this the other day. You sit there, you're breathing and blinking, not thinking about it. It's natural. Okay. So big inherent powers for us include things like immigration, controlling borders, expanding territory. Those are inherent to any sovereign nation. State powers. So powers that are not granted to the national government that are given to the states, okay, often known as reserved powers, state powers, would include things like marriage licenses, issuing licenses, driver's licenses, okay, state powers. Most criminal laws are controlled by states, okay? Talked about criminal laws. Now let's talk about civil law. Okay, civil laws must be recognized by other states. Okay, so the laws that we pass for requirements for you to get your driver's license, you get your driver's license in Kansas, other states recognize that, even though their laws, their driver's license laws may be different than the other state. Okay, so let's say Kansas allowed people to get their license at 14. You had a driver's license, you were 14 and you were driving in Illinois, and they don't let their people get a driver's license till they're 17, you're still legal. So other states must recognize in other states civil laws. Civil laws deal with relationships also between people, like contracts. Okay, between you and I. Okay, other states have to recognize those contracts. The elastic clause. And when we talk about the elastic clause, there's a clause in the Constitution called the necessary and proper clause. Where it stretches federal power. It says Congress can do all things necessary and proper to carry out the laws. Okay. So when this is broad. Okay. So this is what's referred to as not inherent powers, not express powers, but what kind of power? Not inherent, not expressed, but not reserved. It's not specifically written in the Constitution, it is implied. Okay. So examples of this would be the Interstate Commerce Clause. Which is mentioned in the Constitution, okay, but it's not very specific. Okay, Interstate Commerce Clause. Okay, so those of you that have me for history, we talked about the New Deal. And during the New Deal, or prior to the New Deal, this Interstate Commerce Clause was very, very rarely used. Okay. Today, it's used all the time to regulate businesses that do business across state lines. I know I talked about that. Okay, so when you cross state lines, it's interstate, and therefore the national government, through necessary and proper, can regulate your business. So if you're a bank, you're a construction company, okay, you use products from different states, you're doing interstate commerce, they can regulate your business. Okay, and this is where most of our regulations come from. We didn't used to have these until the New Deal, when this implied power began to be used. And so it stretches the authority of government to create thousands and thousands and thousands upon thousands of regulations on our businesses. Does that make sense? Okay. It's not specifically, it's implied, and it stretches the authority of government. Okay. All right. State powers, parent state, civil laws, elastic clause, block grants we did, active mission, express powers. Okay. These powers, express powers, are specifically stated in the Constitution. Express powers specifically stated in the Constitution. So Article 1, Section 8, Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, borrow money, regulate trade, punish counterfeiters, grant patents, copyrights, set up federal courts, declare war, provide and maintain a navy, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, those are all written down, they're expressed. Yes? We did categorical grants, reserve powers, think 10th Amendment, right? 10th Amendment says those powers not granted to the national government nor denied to the states are reserved to the states. Okay? So, powers that are not given to the national government are reserved for the states or the people. The people meaning local government. Example being education. Okay. Constitution doesn't mention education. Not a power that's denied to states. So states and local governments can run education. Full faith and credit clause. Okay. This is what I talked about with your driver's licenses. Okay, where one state must recognize another state's official documents or civil laws. Okay, marriage licenses. Okay, talked about that with gay marriage and how states resisted this, but the Constitution says that one state must recognize another state's official documents. Therefore, each state must recognize the other's licenses, such as driver's and marriage, death certificates, etc. The next one is federal mandates. Okay, mandate is like a directive, right? So it's a requirement. Federal mandate is a requirement that the federal government places on state and local governments. Requirement the federal government places on state and local governments. Does anybody know why the stadium lights were on this morning? Track didn't have practice this morning, did it? Were they on when you guys got here? They were on at 6:30 when I got here. Oh, okay. Coach Man, or Coach Man, what's his name? Gunn. What's that guy's name? Jan. Okay. Now, if federal government directs states and local governments to do something, a requirement, without giving them money, those are called what? Unfunded. Federal courts. Okay. Not sure if I talked about this, but guys, the Constitution says, well, the Constitution only has one court, right? The U.S. Supreme Court. That's the only thing in the Constitution. But it does give Congress the power to create courts below this court, okay? So the federal courts that we have set up, we have 13 circuit courts and then 94 federal district courts. Those were all set up by Congress, okay? So federal courts set up by Congress. And the other thing federal courts do, guys, is they play referee or umpire between the states. So if there's a dispute between Kansas and Nebraska over the amount of water that is being taken out of the Arkansas River, federal courts will settle that dispute between the two states, okay? Which is a really important role for the federal court, to settle these disputes. Part of our federalism. Now, a laboratory of democracy. You guys remember this from the notes last week? Describe what as laboratories of democracy? There's 50 of them. States are laboratories of democracy. Why? What is meant by that? In a sense, what you're looking at, you can experiment with different solutions to problems. Yes, if you have the freedom to do so. If you do away with that freedom, and the federal government has a cookie, you guys know what a cookie cutter is, right? Everyone's the same, right? All 50 states would be the same if Washington, D.C. made all the decisions for every state. Using federalism, reserve powers, allowing states to experiment with solutions to problems gives you a laboratory, so to speak, to come up with good solutions. Yes? The example I used in the notes was welfare reform. I told you guys that the governors of Wisconsin and Michigan tried to get people off of welfare into jobs, into school, and improving their own lives. And those experiments in those two states worked really well. And so we adopted it nationally. If states don't have the flexibility to be laboratories of democracy, then we lose those solutions. We get a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach from the national government. Okay? It's just like the Catholic Church. Okay? We're subsidiarity, where whoever's closest to the problem takes care of the problem. We don't call Washington, D.C. for every little problem we have in Wichita, Kansas. We solve it ourselves. We're capable of that. Even though we're a bunch of hayseeds and hicks out here, we're capable of that. Okay? Remember, unitary systems are where all the power is at the national level. Confederal systems, all the power at the state, local level. Federal is that sharing of power. This is an important part of that sharing of power, allowing states to come up, or local governments to come up with solutions to solve their own problems. Okay? So laboratories of democracy are important. Can you define federalism? Sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments. Sharing, division of power between national, state, and local governments. Between central governments and regional governments. Central being DC, regional being state. Can be phrased differently. Now, guys, when you have a debate over mandates, remember, there's always two sides to a debate. So if you're writing about this, you want to give both sides. So one side is going to be the states. The other side is going to be the national government. Why does the federal government, the national government, want federal mandates? Why do they want to be able to tell the states what to do? Because they're smarter than us. They went to Yale and they went to Princeton, they went to Harvard, and they know better how to run your state than you do. Because you're just a bunch of hicks. Really, that's how many people in Washington, D.C. see Kansas or Alabama or Georgia. They see us, they see them as intellectually superior. They're elitists. You know that, right? People on the coast think we're stupid. They look down on us. We're called flyover country, guys. You heard this before? Flyover country is you got New York and you got LA, everything in between, you know, it's just like flyover country. Now, there's an important part of the national government here when it comes to mandates. I talked about two examples. Environmental codes. Where they are even throughout the states. Okay, so one state can't just invite a bunch of polluters to it. Okay, and it protects people's rights. So when Alabama, South Carolina is mistreating their people that are U.S. citizens, we need the national government to mandate that they protect their rights. So this is the one side of the debate. Then they like to tell us what to do with our money too, okay? Where the states come in. The states aren't very happy with this because remember, the money that the federal government gives to the states, the money originates in the states. So the federal government takes that money from the people and then gives it back with strings attached, okay? So in essence, they're telling us how to spend our own money, which states do not appreciate very much. So categorical grants where they say, look, you have to spend this money on airports, or you have to spend this money on education. You don't have a choice. You have to spend this on special ed. You can't use it for something else. Okay. This is where states appreciate block grants more than categorical grants because it gives them more flexibility. Okay. But really what states would want is just to keep that money themselves anyways and figure out how to spend it how they want anyways. Does that make sense? Back to the elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause. Stretches the authority, the national government, in ways that are not expressed in the Constitution, that are implied in the Constitution. Creating a regulatory cornucopia. Again, with federal courts play referee between the states, settling disputes. Federal courts also hear cases dealing with the Constitution, or people that work for the federal government. So if you attack the postal worker, you're attacking a federal employee. It's a federal crime. You rob a bank that is a member of the Federal Reserve Board, it's a federal crime. If you want to challenge the constitutionality of a law that is passed by Congress. And you are affected by that law, and you say that law is unconstitutional, it will be the federal courts that hear those cases. That make sense? All right. Chapter 4, review.